That the most important thing at this time is that we repent, we become baptized, and we learn the medical missionary service. Because
Amen.
it is that service that is going to make us far more useful to our fellow man. And a small example of that is the story that I'm about to tell you. So I moved to Loma Linda when I was 9 years old because my dad wanted to go to dental school from Canada. I was born in Canada and grew up in the shadow of the medical center, met my wife, got married, went to medical school, graduated, and became a internist and then a pulmonary and critical care specialist and practiced in the area for a number of years. As part of my clinical training and my practice, we would have PA students that would come out and rotate with us. Do you know what a PA student is? A physician assistant. That was a program at Loma Linda, and they would come out and rotate. And one of my students was a gentleman by the name of Kyle Allred, who liked my style of teaching and really wanted to, he had this vision that students nowadays don't open textbooks, and he was right. They don't go to the library and check out books. They go to YouTube and they watch the shortest video possible to learn about something. Yes. So it's in little bits and pieces. Little bits and pieces is they want the fast, and not only do they pick the shortest video, they put it on 2x, right? Yeah. 2 times speed, so they can find the information out the fastest they can possibly do. So in 2012, Kyle Allred and I founded a YouTube channel called MedCram, and the point of that channel was to, if you will, explain things clearly. We called it MedCram because people like to cram for tests. It wasn't sort of like that, but that was the idea. I liked the idea because every time a new student came to my rotation, every month it was a new student and we taught them the same lectures. We would tell them about ABGs and pulmonary function tests and acute renal failure and all of these things that they had to know for the tests. So I thought it was a great idea because then I could just send the students to watch the YouTube video, and then they could come back and we could have a discussion about what they had just seen. The term for that is called flipping the classroom. It's where they go and watch the video and then you talk to them afterwards. So we started to do that, and within a few years, this was 2012, within a few years we had a substantial amount of subscribers on the channel where it was actually making a little bit of income. So we decided to make a whole website called medcram.com where we offered programs of continuing education, medical education, so people could train and learn about how to read a chest x-ray, how to interpret a blood gas, how to look at labs. So very medically minded, okay? And this continued on, and then right before the pandemic hit, we were actually pretty successful. We were up to about 400,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is pretty substantial. So we had a number of people that were taking us seriously. We were out there in the YouTube world, and we were doing medical education. And then the pandemic hit. Actually, even before the pandemic hit, there was my wife and I would talk, and she said, "Yeah, there's this virus over in China. Maybe you should make a video about that." She told me one night. I remember that night very well. It was cold. We had just sat by the fireplace. And she told me that, so I went and made a video about coronavirus, as it was called at the time. And woke up the next morning, and my eyes were like saucers, and my mouth dropped, because this video had gone viral. Because it was about what was all about coronavirus, how does the virus replicate. I went into the details of it, because I wanted to do a good job. Well, of course, if you make a video and it goes viral, what's the next thing you do? Make another video. And so this is and we were going down this road together because we didn't know anything about this virus, as you all know. This was the first time we had seen this. And this was a virus that was really in my wheelhouse because I was what kind of a doctor? A lung doctor. And this was something that was affecting people's lungs. It was causing them to go to the hospital. So as I started to research this and started to delve into it, I needed to make sure, number one, I was accurate, number two, that I knew what I was talking about and I was passing along the right information and not saying more than I knew. And so that built a reputation that I wasn't, and certainly this is another important thing, is that I wasn't using it for political purposes. as a lot of people were using. They're using the medical profession as a way of manipulating to advance their political beliefs. And that was a lot of what was on YouTube at the time. So as I was making these videos, I was reflecting, because you and I, we all grew up in the Adventist church. Some of you maybe not have grown up in the Adventist church. But I always remembered hearing about, or my grandmother, who was the first Adventist in our family, about some of these things that she would do in terms of health when my father was ill at home or something that came down with things, right? You all remember this. And this is the thing that really I find amazing to me, is that literally, whether I'm talking to somebody from Asia, from Africa, from Europe, from the Middle East, from anywhere, it's almost exactly the same things that we all hear. What is it? What happens when you're sick? You go out outside into the sun, or you heat them up, or you put them by the fire. You use whatever it is that you have. I've heard stories where they would put people out into it, like in Iran, they would put them out into the hot sand, okay, to make sure to heat them up until they were sweating. That's how it was in Iran. Up in Sweden, they would put them in the sauna, okay? So in other words, it's the same things that we kept on hearing about, and I started to look into these things, and you know what? Sure enough, there was enough little bit of research that was coming out at that time that if you looked into it and researched it, you'd see that maybe some of these things were beneficial. Hydrotherapy. Have you heard of hydrotherapy before? Yes. Okay. Sunlight. Do you know what Ellen G. White says about sunlight? So these were things that unfortunately we didn't have a lot of information about at the beginning of the pandemic, but this is what I focused on my YouTube channel. We focused on things that we knew might be beneficial. So one of the things that we have a lot of research on was sleep. So we talked about sleep. How we have a lot of research that shows that people who come down with this illness do not have good immune systems. And how sleep, we could show that people who get adequate amounts of sleep regularly have good immune systems. So even though it's hard to sleep when all of these things are going on, if you're able to sleep, like Christ was at the bottom of the boat when the storm was going around him, if you're able to do that, you're going to have better immune systems to deal with this virus that comes along. We showed how sleep is beneficial. We showed how sunlight was beneficial. We showed how hydrotherapy was beneficial. And we went through the whole pandemic. Of course, the vaccines came around. Then we talked about some of these supplements, vitamin D, all of these things. And we showed the research, the data behind it. It was a very trying time for myself because I was a pulmonologist, and so I was working very hard in the hospital. We had to open up a whole nother ICU because we had so many patients. Our normal ICU census was 12 beds. It's a community hospital. I should clarify, I don't work at Loma Linda University Medical Center, but I am on faculty at the university. I actually work down the street at a community hospital called Redlands Community. They have 12 ICU beds. At one point during the pandemic, we had 40 patients in the intensive care unit. And that's because we had to open up and license other beds to be used for ICU. People were on ventilators, people were dying, people were coding. We were running back and forth. Some of you may have experienced some of that as nurses or physicians. So all of this was going on. And then as things were starting to die down, as people were not getting as sick as they were, this is probably 2022 now, okay? I got a call. Actually, I got an email. I got an email from the Prime Minister's office of the country of Bahrain. I had to quickly go to the map to see where Bahrain was. And they said they wanted to talk to us about COVID. I said, okay. Excited. Because at this point, I was seeing everything that was happening, and my success in this field was something that God had just provisioned. For some reason, I don't know what his plans were, but it was going to happen somehow. So we met with the Prime Minister Office's secretary, and he says, we would like to get on a Zoom meeting. Me and Kyle. Kyle was the one whose idea this was. So we met, and we were there on the Zoom meeting, and they said, it's funny what he said. He said, look, we told you that we wanted to meet with you because we wanted to see what was going on. But if we were to really tell you what we were planning on, you would have probably thought it was a fake email. Have you gotten those fake emails, from a brother in Nigeria who has $50 million that you're going to inherit? Okay. He says that's what usually happens when we call you and we tell you this because no sooner were we on the Zoom call than the Crown Prince appeared on the Zoom call with us, who is also the Prime Minister, as you know.
Wow.
And he says, hey, he was funny because we were looking at him in shock, and he said that he was looking at us in shock because he says, I just wanted to say, Dr. Schwelt, that I have been following your MedCram channel from day one. Every morning I would get up and I would be walking on my treadmill listening to the latest episode of MedCram. And he says, I want to tell you that a lot of the policies that we instituted were a result of me watching your channel. Wow. He said once he met with the WHO director, and he says it was funny, I was telling him all of these things that I had learned about the virus. And Tedros, right, the WHO guy, he's looking at him saying, how do you know so much? And he turned to him and he says, YouTube. He could not believe it. Anyway, so he says, I want to congratulate you, and he says, because of your help, I want to present to you the Medical Merit Medal.
Wow.
And so he had a trip coming up to Washington later in the year, and I flew out to Washington and I actually met the Crown Prince. And he presented me with the medal. I have a photograph, we can show you later. If I can, I'll just show you on my phone. In preparation for that meeting, I prayed hard about this opportunity. And does anyone have your Bible out? Okay, so look at Revelation chapter 10, verse 11. Revelation chapter 10, verse 11. And this was a prophecy that for me was coming true. Do you remember? This is right after the part in Revelation where John is told by the angel that I want you to take this book and put it in your mouth. And what would it be like in your mouth? Sweet as honey, right? And then in the belly it would be bitter. But he says, I want you to prophesy again. What was that text in relation to? Was that already fulfilled in prophecy? Has that already happened? Yes, that's happened. Where was that? Where was that already fulfilled?
1844?
1844. In 1844, the first and the second angel's message went forth, right? The first angel's message was, fallen is, no, that's the third angel. The first one was that the hour of his judgment has come. And the second one was, fallen is Babylon, right? And so we ate that message that was so sweet in our mouth. But on October 22nd, 1844, when Christ did not come, that was the bitterness in our belly. But what were we told to do? Prophesy again. Now read Revelation chapter 10, verse 11, if I have that right. Could someone read it?
And he said to me, you must prophesy again about many people's tongues.
Keep reading. Okay, so read that whole sentence.
And he said to me, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings.
And kings. Now, granted, the crown prince is not a king technically, but he will be.
Yeah.
And so by prophesying to the crown prince, you are prophesying to kings. And so my father was the one I took with me to on that trip, and we brought 3 books with us. We brought 3 books that we were going to present to the crown prince. The first one was The Ministry of Healing.
Mm-hmm.
The second book was The Great Controversy.
Oh.
And the third book was Desire of Ages.
Wow.
Okay. So, how are you going to present these 3 books to the crown prince? So, have them all wrapped nicely. My sister-in-law actually had wrapped them very beautifully in gift paper, and we took them with us. When we met with the crown prince, it was at the Four Seasons Hotel in Washington, D.C. the bodyguards took the presents from us. And he says, don't worry, you'll be able to present them later. We just have to make sure that they're safe. And so they undid all of the wrapping. So, and I actually have a picture of this. So when we went in, we had a very good discussion, my father and I, with the Crown Prince. And actually a lot of the ministers, the Minister of Finance was there, the Minister of Health was there as well. And I said, I just prayed because I had nothing in my mind at that moment. I prayed to God. I said, God, give me the right words to say. So I said, well, so the first book in my mind that was going to be the easiest one to present to the Crown Prince was, guess which one? Ministry of Healing. That one's the easy one, right? Okay. So I said to him, you know, and by the way, I had done a little bit of research on the Crown Prince. He was actually educated at the American University in Washington, D.C. That's where he was educated. And of course, what's the major museum system in Washington, D.C. but the Smithsonian? The Smithsonian has a group of massive museums where they have all of the artifacts of the great American country. Well, recently, about 2 years ago, the Smithsonian Institute came up with the top 100 influential Americans of all time. Do you know who made one of those top 100? Ellen G. White. She was considered one of the top 100 influential Americans. So I led with that. I said, Your Highness, because that's how you address. Ellen G. White, if you've watched my YouTube videos, we did talk about hydrotherapy, and let me just back up a little bit. One of the things that was the most helpful in terms of the Crown Prince, in terms of our videos, was a gentleman that we had on by the name of Dr. Michael Minna. He was out of the Harvard Public School of Health, and we actually had him interviewed. And he was talking about paper testing. Paper testing was this thing that you all know. This is where you go in, it's called antigen testing. This is the things that you can do and test whether or not you've got COVID-19. Well, I believe when the policymakers here in Manama saw that video, they were able to locate and buy up as quickly as possible those paper tests, those testing kits from Germany, before any of the other governments of the world were able to do that, because it took a lot of red tape to get all that done. And here, whether you like it or not, in Manama, when you have a Crown Prince who's also the Prime Minister, you eliminate a lot of red tape. If things get done very quickly, very efficiently. And he said he called up the guy in Germany. He says, how many do you have? We have 5,000. He says, I'll take all of them, and how many more you want to make? I'll take those too. And so I wasn't here at the time, but maybe, how many were here in 2020? So I understand that there were major testing centers set up where you could go through. That was where that came from. That was apparently where that came from, was him able to find out that information and to get those testing centers in, and apparently that saved a lot of people's lives because they were able to figure out who had COVID and to isolate at the right time. So anyway, I told him, I said, we talked a lot about testing, but we also talked about hydrotherapy, sunlight. These are sorts of things that I think are very beneficial and may be useful in a future pandemic if that ever happens. And where I got that information from was one at Smithsonian, and he obviously knew what the Smithsonian was growing up in Washington, D.C., named one of the most influential people in the United States. And she wrote a book about health and healing, and it's this book, The Ministry of Healing. Now, it was a regular book that you could get at the ABC, and he looked at it, he was very thankful for it, and he put it away. And hopefully it's still on his shelf for future reference. Now, the next book, The Great Controversy. How do I introduce that? So then I said to him, she also wrote about some other things. Not only things that could make us happy and healthy in the present, but also, and I was trying to find the right words to say, and he said, in the future? Yes, exactly, in the future. And she wrote this book called The Great Controversy. This goes into the great controversy of things. And I handed him a copy of The Great Controversy, and he thanked me, he looked at that as well, and he put that one aside. Now, the next one, of course, is The Desire of Ages. So let me tell you a little bit about the backstory and how I got that book. This is not your regular Desire of Ages. When I told people back home that I was going on this trip, there's a large, well, you can imagine in Loma Linda there's a large everything that's Adventist, right? So there's a large Filipino church in Loma Linda. There's a large Indonesian church, Japanese church, Chinese church. They have all their own churches in Loma Linda. You can go, you can decide, what do you want to eat today for potluck? Do you want Chinese food, Thai food, Japanese food? You can decide where you want to eat. My wife would probably go to the Thai church every single day, every single week. There's also a large a Lebanese faction as well, and Middle Eastern. And there's a pastor who passed away, and his daughter, who's in her 50s or 60s maybe, she heard about this and she knew immediately what she needed to do. Many years ago, he had bought a copy of The Desire of Ages that was printed in Arabic. And it was nicely bound, not just regular Arabic, it was like Quran Arabic. And it was printed in this very nicely leather-bound book. And you know how it opens. It opens what we, like in the United States, we would say it opens at the back, right? But that's how they read, from the back. And it has a nice inlay leather. It was beautiful. And that was the next book. So they found out about this. They gave me the book. I had it all nicely wrapped. And so I knew that was the next book coming up. So I said, there's one more book. And I said, and I did a little bit of research. I had researched, what does Islam think about Jesus? And I understand that they believe that he is a prophet. And so I knew enough. So I said to the Crown Prince, I said, I know that Islam believes that Jesus is a prophet. And he said, and so I'm sitting there, I was like, okay, everything's going great. I know that and I'm getting ready with the next book, I know that in Islam, Jesus Christ is considered a prophet. And he goes, no! I'm like, oh no, this is it, I'm gonna get arrested. Just, where am I going here? He said, no! And then he said this. He said, Jesus Christ is coming back to save us. Amen. That's what they believe. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is coming back to save us.
Yeah.
So I said, so again, this is how it went. I said, I understand in Islam that you believe that Jesus Christ is a prophet. No! Jesus Christ is coming back to save us. He is more than just a prophet. And I go, yes! And here's a book that she wrote just about him. And now with renewed interest, he took this book and he looked at it, he says, wow, this is amazing. He was very impressed with the appearance of the book, the fact that it was written in Arabic, and he immediately says, where was this book published? And he opened it up and he looked, he says, I couldn't read a word of it because it was all in Arabic, right? He looks down, he says, Lebanon. It's printed in Lebanon. And I found out later that Lebanon, out of all of the Middle Eastern countries, is the one that is most tolerant of Christianity. In fact, the Adventist Church has a university in Lebanon, as many of you know. So he took that book. Now, those 3 books are in his possession, and I pray every day that he opens the covers of any one of those books and reads it. But imagine, this was to me, all of this was simply because of something where, if I would have ever planned that this was something that I would have wanted to do, I would not have thought that was the way it was going to happen. And so what impressed me about this was that simply taking the talents that God has given you in your specific area and doing your job to the best of your ability and just being ready for that time that God calls you. For some reason that you don't know about, at what time it's going to be, you don't know. You're sitting, it's like you're sitting at a red light and your car is there, you're ready to go, but it's a red light. God is not yet ready for you to do your job for him. But when that light turns green, he expects you to be ready. And that's all this was. This was something that started in 2012 for me. And it took me 8 years to be prepared to be in the place where I needed to be at that moment. And then when time hit, faithfully witnessing about our beliefs and Christianity at that time. And all it took was just one person to witness what you were doing. And that was all it was. And that gives you the ability to then go before kings like Daniel, okay, or Mordecai, okay? All of those, it was just amazing to me. And again, the point is that here is where the medical missionary work is going to be that work that is going to be that wedge that gets you into places that you would never be able to get there in the first place. So this is the second part of what I want to say, and that is this, is that you don't have to be a doctor to do medical missionary work, okay? Let me read to you what Ellen White says about this. She says, this is in manuscript 46, written in 1904. So this is much later, okay? This is toward the end of her life. She says, "My brethren, the Lord calls for unity, for oneness. We are to be one in the faith. I want to tell you that when the gospel ministers and the medical missionary workers are not united, there is placed on our churches the worst evil that can be placed there. Our medical missionaries ought to be interested in the work of the conferences, and our conferences workers ought to be as much as interested in the work of our medical missionaries." So what are we talking about here? What is the medical mission? Are you all going to be doing cardiac catheters on patients? No, this is not the work that God has asked us to do. If you want to think back at the work that we're asked to do, think about the work that we did in the sanitariums 100 years ago. The work that we're doing in the sanitariums 100 years ago, you don't even need sanitariums to do that work today. Okay? If you want to think about a mnemonic, think about the word NEWSTART. Have you heard of NEWSTART before? Yes. So N stands for what? Nutrition. So not only thinking about nutrition if you want to be a message to other people about nutrition, you have to make sure that you are looking at nutrition in your own life. Okay? So the first thing, do you remember what happened in Exodus when the Israelites were getting ready to leave Egypt? They had to make sure there was no leaven in their house first before the Egyptians would come into their homes. Right? Okay, so we can't ask for the Egyptians to come into our homes if we still have leaven in it. So we need to start thinking about what we can control first. So nutrition, that's N. E, exercise. You know what? We're not talking about running a marathon. That's actually bad. The science shows that excessive exercise is actually more damaging. What type of exercise are we talking about? The type of exercise that you would do if you went outside into your garden when it's not this hot. Okay? That moderate amount of exercise. So what we're talking about is people not sitting on their chairs for 8 hours a day at their job. That's not good. Getting up, walking around, doing a little bit of exercise, that's very helpful. All right, that's NEW. What's W stand for?
Water.
All right, so let me tell you, when I was starting to study these things and this paper started to come out in the literature, water is good internally to flush us out, but you know what water is also very good for? Water is a very unique substance in that it carries a lot of heat. That's why you burn yourself if you have a pot of boiling water, because there is such a tremendous amount of heat that is stored in water. That's a very important property. So if you want to heat up somebody, if you want to raise their temperature, doing it with hot water is very easy to do. That's why fomentations and things that you put hot towels on people to heat up their body and to have a temperature, we are starting to show now, this is scientific literature coming out, that fevers are very good at preventing viral replication. Okay? That a fever increases the amount of a substance called interferon, which circulates around in the body and actually kills viruses. The viruses that infect us today have mechanisms inside of them that try to counteract our body's interferon. That's why you become infected. So water has a tremendous property to transfer heat. And if you use it wisely and study about how to use it, you can be a help not only to yourself, to your family, but when the time comes and there are plagues and things going on, that when you go out and start to help other people with simple techniques that you will have available for you, because we're not going to have an infrastructure at that time, right? You're not going to be able to go to the pharmacy and get pills. Do you understand this? God has given us this idea, this understanding about how to help people using very simple techniques, because that's all we're going to have at that time. That's why we should relearn those things that we once learned as an institution again. And this is why it's very beneficial. Okay, that's W. N-E-W, start, S-T-A-R-T. What is S? Sunlight. I could spend the next hour talking to you about light, but I'll tell it to you very briefly. We are just beginning to understand about how light helps the human body. It's not just the skin. There is a portion of the sunlight that actually a very large portion of the sunlight called infrared light. Infrared light is able to penetrate through your clothes. It's able to penetrate your skin and go deeply within your body. It's able to penetrate because it's a low frequency energy. It's kind of like, if you pull up to a stop sign and someone's next to you and they're playing loud music, what kind of frequency do you hear when that happens? Do you hear the high-pitched sounds or the low-pitched sounds? Exactly. When lightning is striking far away, how does the thunder sound? Does it sound high or low? It's low, because low frequency energy can travel very far, and it can travel through solid objects. So the low frequency energy, that's the energy that's beyond the red, that's the infrared, can penetrate through your clothes, can penetrate through your skin. And we're starting to see that that particular type of energy is very good for mitochondria. Mitochondria are tiny little subcellular organelles in your cells that make energy. And what scientists are now discovering is that part of the reason why we develop the diseases that we get when we get older, the reason why we can't see so well, the reasons why we get diabetes, the reasons why we have dementia, it's all related to mitochondria not working correctly. And do you know what can correct that? Sunlight. Okay, there was a study that was recently just done that showed that people in their 60s and 70s that cannot tell the difference between colors very well, all it took was about 3 minutes of red light in the morning, and there was improvement that lasted a whole week. That was just recently published in an article. So getting outside, sunlight is very, very beneficial. In fact, there was another study that was just published recently that showed, this is from Brazil, that when they took COVID patients that were in the hospital and they exposed them to infrared light for just 15 minutes a day for 7 days, these patients were actually discharged from the hospital 4 days earlier on average. 4 days earlier. To the point now that I'm getting my COVID patients in the hospital outside. I had a patient that came in. He was admitted to the hospital, and he was on oxygen, and the oxygen was getting worse and worse and worse. They don't call me until they're ready to be intubated because I'm an ICU doctor. So when I went down to see this gentleman, he had been in the hospital for 2 days. He came in on just 4 liters of oxygen. By the time I was seeing him, he was on 35 liters of oxygen, 100%. And this is despite being on steroids, despite being on antibiotics, despite getting all of the treatment that we normally give people with COVID. I immediately got this gentleman outside in the sun for 20 minutes and did that on a daily basis. After the first day, he went from 35 liters down to 15 liters.
Wow.
And from there, after 3 or 4 more days, he was off all oxygen and he was discharged. Okay, this can be done. Sunlight. Ellen White says that sunlight is a physician. She talks about getting out into the sun. I know that's hard here. It's very hot.
Oh,
My wife and I, on Faith, walked a mile from the downtown hotel. What's it called again? What is it? That one. We walked a mile. It was 1.6 kilometers. And we would always pick the side of the street that was in the shade. Yeah. And we were so happy that when we came here, the air conditioning was on. That was by faith. No, but S is really important. we see it so much more important for people who live in high latitudes. Sweden, Finland, England, Canada, certain parts of the United States. Very, very important to get sunlight, because if you don't get sunlight, you get a lot of these diseases. We know that diseases like multiple sclerosis, that is a disease that typically affects people living at high latitudes, okay? And we have studies that have come out showing that people who died of COVID-19 were more likely to be living at higher latitudes. The higher in latitude, higher up, further away from the sun you were, the higher the mortality rate was. Okay? So this is something that would be very beneficial. So would it make sense that if someone is sick or in a nursing home who might get sick, these people, what happens when you go into a nursing home? I don't know how it is here in Bahrain. I can tell you back in the United States, we put people away in nursing homes in dark corners of the building, and they never get outside to see the day of light, the light of day. Okay? These are people who are at risk for having dementia, disease, COVID-19, things of that nature. So getting outside regularly, getting exercise, fresh air. All right, so NEWS, what does the T stand for? Temperance, exactly. So smoking, alcohol, drugs, these things are these are the easiest ones, right? We should know about this. But you know, Ellen White thought about this stuff and wrote this stuff down at a time when doctors prescribed smoking for lung ailments. So, okay, it may seem obvious to us now, but science has moved us in the right direction, okay? All right, that's ST. What about A? What does A stand for? Air. And this is something that's really important. Fresh air is really important. You know, there was, do you know who Florence Nightingale is? She was known as the mother of modern nursing. And she was born to two very well-to-do British parents. But she decided, despite the fact that she had all of this money in her family and she had all of this abilities, she decided she was not going to use that. Instead, she was going to become a nurse, and she helped out her fellow countrymen during the Crimean War. This is back in the 1850s. Okay, so she was at the bedside helping people get better. Do you know what she says? She says the two most important things for people to recover from their illness. This is in 1850. 1850. This is before Ellen G. White received the health message. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you here is that these remedies are so effective that even people who are not inspired by the Word of God necessarily, I can't judge Florence Nightingale, but she wasn't given the health message as far as I know. But she could see that when the health message was put into play, she could see the results of that. She says, number one, the most important thing that would heal everybody, fresh air. Number two, and she says it's a very close second, she's quoted as saying this in 1850, not only just daylight, but direct sunlight. Okay, so that's what she talks about. All right, so STAR, and what's the last T? Trusting God, exactly, trusting God. Let me tell you a brief, what's that? Oh, I forgot the other R, didn't I? Rest, and I'm a sleep physician as well, so R. So R is rest. Let's talk about rest and then we'll go to trust. So R is rest. So rest has a number of different aspects of it. The most obvious one is sleep. And we have myriads of studies that show that getting 7 hours of sleep per night is very beneficial for our immune system. There was a study that was done where they divided two groups, people that got 7+ hours of sleep per night and people that got less than 7 hours of sleep per night. And they all got a flu vaccine, okay? And when they checked the antibodies to the flu vaccine about a week later or so, they found that people that got 7+ hours of sleep per night had twice as many antibodies to the flu vaccine than those that didn't get 7+ hours of sleep. What does that tell you? It tells you that when you're getting sleep, you have a better immune system, and a better immune system is going to mean it's going to mount an antibody response against that foreign invader. Okay, so that's key, rest. That's a daily rest. But is there another type of rest? Sabbath. Yes, there's a weekly rest, Sabbath. So imagine having to do your daily routine forever without a rest. You can't break it up. You don't have the time to sort of reflect. And it's interesting because if you look through nature, there are animals, there are biorhythms where every 7 days there is a natural rhythm of a break put in. Have you ever wondered why every single culture in the world has a 7-day week? Isn't it interesting? Have there been other cultures that have tried to go away from a 7-day week?
No.
Yes, there actually has been. Does anyone know? Does anyone know that in the 19th century? No, in the 18th century, in the 1700s, there was a culture that had a revolution that wanted to throw away everything, and it said we're throwing away religion, we're throwing away the 7-day work week, we're going to go to a 10-day work week. How many people want a 10-day work week? No. You work 9 days, you get one. No, that's not going to work, right? The French actually came up with a 10-day week.
Yeah,
Because they loved the decimal system, I guess. So they threw out the 7-day week. It didn't last very long. They also threw out the 12-month year. They went to a 10th-month year. It didn't work. No, but every single culture in the world has a 7-day week. We know that. And we know why that is because the world was created in a 7-day week, right? And the 7th day was the rest. Here's something to consider. If you look at the 10 Commandments, it says, remember the 7th day to keep it holy, right? It's the one day that God says to remember, is the why he said remember, because we would what? Forget. So that's important. The other thing is that because of the 10 Commandments, many people believe that the Sabbath was only instituted for the Jews. Okay, so then we point them towards the fact that God hallowed the Sabbath day after he worked for 6 days and created the earth. Do we have any other evidence that the 10 Commandments were not instituted at Sinai, but reinstituted at Sinai? If you look at Genesis 26, I believe it is, Moses wrote Genesis 26, but he wrote it about what God said about Abraham. And do you remember what God said about Abraham? He says he kept my precepts, my commandments, and my laws. What laws did Abraham know about? I think God had instituted those all the way back to Eden. And the sacrificial system as well. Why else would Cain and Abel be having a disagreement about what needed to be sacrificed? It's interesting, isn't it? So, the Sabbath rest is important. All right, and finally, trust, correct? Okay. I want to tell you about a little study about trust. So this is really important to understand if you're taking care of people who are sick. What is the reason why what is the ultimate reason why we are sick today? This gets to a theological discussion. Why are we sick?
Anxiety.
Why do we have high stress? I'm gonna be like your 2-year-old. I'm gonna be like your 2-year-old, and every answer that you're gonna give me, I'm gonna say why.
We don't trust God.
Okay, yeah, that's true, but why don't we trust God? Exactly. And what is disobedience? What's another name for disobedience? Sin. Transgression of the law. Sin. Sin is the reason why we have everything. Isn't it?
Yes.
Is not?
Yeah, that's
Death, disease is all a product of sin. So if somebody comes to you and has an illness and you correct that illness medically, physically, but you don't fix the underlying problem, which is what? Sin. Have you done anything for them? You have not done anything for them. If someone has an abscess and I try to correct their abscess, but I don't, is it 2:30? Do you have a meeting? Okay. They have their program. Okay. If I don't lance the abscess and let the pus come out, is the patient going to get better? No. So what I'm trying to say is that the physical illnesses that we all have are simply outward manifestations of sin. That's the problem. There was a study that was done where they looked at people who they divided them into two groups of people. and this was a survey that they did. This is really important. They had people who forgave conditionally and people who forgave unconditionally. What do I mean by that? They would say, I will forgive an enemy of mine if they were to come first and ask for forgiveness. That's called forgiving conditionally. Those are those people, okay? The other people were those that forgave unconditionally. Those are the people that says, it doesn't matter what my enemy does to me. It doesn't matter if they come and ask for forgiveness. I am going to forgive them anyway, okay? And they looked at the health problems of those two groups of people. The ones that forgave conditionally, only if someone came first to them. Those people had less quality of life. They had more somatic symptoms of pain. They had more depression, more mood disorders. They had all of those things. The ones that did not forgive conditionally but forgave unconditionally, the ones that just forgave, regardless of what their enemies did, those people had less depression, better quality of life. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So here's the real interesting thing. The interesting thing was what determined whether or not they wanted to figure out what is it that determines whether somebody forgives conditionally or unconditionally. What is it in their life that makes a person one way or the other? And they found there was one thing that determined whether or not they were one thing or the other. Do you know what it was? It was trusting God, but it was even more specific than that. It was the understanding that God had forgiven them. The understanding that God had forgiven them. This was a study that was published, major scientific publication. So, if somebody is in your office and they have an illness, and you know what the disease is, and you know how to fix it, you're fixing the outward manifestation, and you let them go. Or somebody is on the bed and they're dying. What is the root cause? What is the abscess that needs to be drained?
Sin.
They need to know what? What is it that determines whether they forgive conditionally or unconditionally? It's to know that God has forgiven them. Do you know what Ellen White writes in Ministry of Healing? I think it's chapter 12. She talks about in the chapter that's called A Prayer for the Sick. You should read that chapter and know that chapter. She talks about in that chapter that if somebody is there and you can pray for health, you can pray for healing, and if God decides to give it, He can give it. But the one thing that you must open up to that person is to say, is there anything in your life that you need to confess? Because if there's something in their life that they can confess, they can get off their chest, and God has forgiven them, and they know that God has forgiven them. Now they're going to be somebody that's going to be more likely to forgive unconditionally, and now they're going to get, as a result of that, all of those health benefits. Now you're truly healing them, and you're doing exactly what the motto of Loma Linda University is, our healthcare institution flagship, which is to make man whole. And how do we do that? Not just by treating them medically with medicines, but to treat them spiritually, mentally, emotionally, all of those things. And that is the key that is going to help us when the medical work is that wedge that gets us in. We can now truly heal, because all they see is the physical. But when they see that we have much more to offer than just healing them physically, but also mentally and spiritually, then we have done the work of God. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak and to listen and to understand, to open your word. Help us to do what your will is. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.